Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by Beavers Edge writer Ryan Harlan and Beavers Edge writer and KEGO radio host T.J. Mathewson. We're coming to you guys ahead of Oregon State's matchup with San Jose State on Saturday. The Beavers and Spartans will gear up to kick off, at 12:30 p.m. We'll have full coverage of that game. All three of us will be there, and we'll obviously be bringing you guys full coverage of pre, during, and post game. We obviously caught up with you guys last week and talked about the kind of expectations for the stretch run as Oregon State has 4 games left, sitting 4-4 on the season, and our thoughts on whether or not they go to a bowl game. As it turns out, the quarterback competition that we discussed is still wide open. We'll be getting into that in the podcast as well. Oregon State men's basketball got off to a 1-0 start. Great to see Wayne Tinkle's squad coming out of the gates with a win. Scott Ruick's women's team is going to tip off tomorrow on Friday, so we'll be keeping tabs on them as well. But good to catch up with you guys. We obviously made it through the bye week, and I must say, and there's probably a lot of Beaver fans watching, and good to be with you guys. Thanks for checking out this podcast. I feel like it's harder going into a bye week when the last time you saw your team play was such a very upsetting result. And I've kind of noticed that just in conversations with some Beaver fans and gauging the mood. And I think Oregon State really needs to get back on the right track, and I think this is a real get right opportunity for them. And we'll kind of get into the nuts and bolts of that. But what's your guys' thoughts coming off the bye week when it was such just a season low? And TJ, Wood, and start with you, buddy. What's going on, man? How are you?
I'm good. It feels like you're playing more with house money at this point, I would say. Because the expectation of the season now, at best, you are going to get the lowest rung of bowl game. That's the best case result right now. So you want the best case. If you got, knowing the injuries and knowing the flaws with this team, if you got to that at this point, you would say that's a success under a first-year head coach who had to go through all the things that Trent Bray had to go to. It feels okay. And maybe you spring an upset in the final 2 weeks of the season. You play insanely well. You have a stroke of good health luck against either Boise State or Washington State. And, not only would you get the satisfaction of a good win, you'd probably knock the teams out of playoff contention too. That would all be a huge plus. That would be a house money win at that point. Just like I think it would be, even though the Beavers are favored against San Jose State, it's essentially a coin flip game. It's what Vegas thinks of this game.
Right. Very reminiscent of the Reno game where it was a 3-point spread. And, I think there's some similarities.
So there's a lot of boxes they have to check. We're going to spend a ton of time talking about the quarterbacks, but you just want to see some positive out of the bye week. Are there, with Thomas Collins, for example, coming back this week, are they going to be sizably better against the run? With Jaden Robinson back, are they not going to have a performance against a passing game like they had against Cal, where Fernando Mendoza just tore him up through the air? Are you going to be able to, against the team that passes more than any team in the country does in San Jose State, going to be able to keep that team back and one of the best wide receivers in the country in Nick Nash? So that's sort of how it feels going into this game. I don't know if I would have an expectation for this game. This game essentially dictates whether or not you make a bowl game, because you're probably beating Air Force. But this game's not for certain. So I feel like that's why I think it's hard to have an expectation, you're going to lose, you're going to win this game coming up.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's got some, like you said, I think you summed it up perfectly, TJ, where just the expectations have been reassessed, right? And so many things have changed from a standpoint of 4 weeks ago, there was a lot more optimism. And now, I was talking about it on Rip City Mornings, this morning, where it's it's the season's kind of been bifurcated for Beaver fans, where it's truth be told, since Reno, it's kind of been downhill, right? I mean, you talk about that double overtime win over Colorado State. The very next weekend, you have the performance against Nevada, where your defense is probably the worst it's been all year. I mean, again, I think there was even still more defensive showing against Cal. I think if they showed the defense they showed against Nevada, against Cal, probably would have been even worse. But then you come home, play a little bit better against UNLV. But as we talked about, you kind of missed opportunity to win that game, right? Multiple opportunities. And then you go and you have your worst. So it's kind of been a backsliding month in different ways. And I'm curious, kind of, Ryan, just you're obviously, there on campus and all those things. Just what has kind of the vibes been like, this during the bye week and now, and kind of what's your kind of thoughts on what TJ was saying about how kind of everyone's had to kind of reassess expectations a little bit?
That's essentially what it's been. Like, I know a lot of my friends have kind of at the start of this season were like, oh yeah, like 9-3, 10-2. And now they're just like, just make a bowl game. That's literally what they've
Yeah.
said. It's like that's what it is. And I think for me, just kind of taking it and looking at this week as another opportunity for the Beavers to try and go 1-0 and keep the expectations low. This is partly why I do that. And for this week, this weekend, I'm just keeping it really low, being like, hey, look, like they can win this game, but I need to see a massive improvement from the past few weeks before this bye week, being able to carry over what you did against UNLV defensively, in against San Jose State, and showing some semblance of a passing game too. Because if they basically showed what they did against Cal early on before the quarterback
Right.
change, I don't think they win this game. I
Right.
really don't. If they pull that type of performance out offensively against San Jose State, like I just don't think they win this weekend. But just keep the expectations kind of low and being like, hey, look, just get to a bowl game. That's
Right.
literally what the mindset has been at this point.
Yeah, it's very interesting too when you look back and obviously, we'll talk quarterback play here momentarily. TJ alluded to, Thomas Collins, also worth mentioning, Jaden Robinson will be back. That's surely going to help shore up the defensive backfield. We'll obviously have the full injury report at Beaver's Edge, either later today as we're recording this podcast on a Thursday or tomorrow on Friday. But we're interesting enough, a couple common opponents between these two teams in recent weeks, and it's the direct opposite. San Jose State lost to Colorado State as Oregon State beat them. San Jose State beat Nevada as Oregon State lost to them. So I think, that's kind of interesting, and, just the way matchups work and all those kind of things. Let's go ahead and start. TJ, you alluded to Nick Nash, and, I think he's easily, like, we talked about Colorado State, and I'm drawing a blank on their receiver's name.
Torrey Horton.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
And he was to that point where, like, this is probably the best receiver they're going to face this year. This is a guy who's probably going to, be drafted next year to an extent. I'm not sure exactly what Nick Nash's pro prospects are. I haven't dove into him that much, but regardless, 80 catches, almost 1,000 yards, 12 touchdowns. This guy has been ridiculously efficient. And to TJ's credit, you saw Fernando Mendoza cook this team, or sorry, Ryan, and it was one of those things where maybe it was just a boulder rolling downhill, but San Jose State doesn't quite have the run game that they have in balance with their pass game, so they're going to want to throw more. And I'm just curious with you guys, even with getting Jaden Robinson back, what would be kind of your defensive game plan and looking to slow down the Spartans in this one? And TJ, let's go ahead and start with you.
Let Jaden Robinson eat. That would probably be a good one. He's your best cover guy.
Yeah.
I think they'll try and mix it up a little bit. Trent said they're not going to just shadow him with Jaden. He said they'll probably, depending on whether they're playing zone or man, that will dictate who's covering Nick Nash.
Right.
Like, I don't want to make box score assumptions. Nash's production, it's been good during Mountain West play. It was a lot better during non-conference play. Right. Non-conference play, he really, really lit it up. But during conference play, he's been good, but he hasn't had like the 2 games he had to end non-conference play. Against Kennesaw State, he had 17 catches for 225 and 3 touchdowns. And then against Washington State, he had 16 catches for 152 yards and 2 touchdowns.
That was a barn burner, absolute barn burner of a game. Yeah,
he's had good games since then, but he hasn't had like really the outlier, like a Devontae Smith Heisman type game after game after game after game. So like, it seems like teams have at least sort of limited his explosiveness. He still managed to find the end zone in every game. He still managed to go over in that stretch over 75 yards in every single game. And even with Jaden Robinson being back, there are ways to scheme receivers away from corners. There are ways to scheme guys open. Doesn't matter what kind of coverage you're playing. Like, they're going to target him. They target him a lot. So he's going to get his catches. He's probably going to get a touchdown or two in this game. Just what do you allow everyone else to do in this game? And that dictates it, because Cal spread it around and they did it remarkably well.
Right. It's also very interesting to me, like, as you mentioned, Nash, and obviously, you got to give credit to the guy getting in the ball, and Emmett Brown. And I think you look at his stats, it's kind of interesting. Doesn't complete a high percentage of throws, only about 57%, fellas, but got a 16-5 touchdown to interception ratio. And that is probably why, the Spartans have a winning record. And I'll be honest with you guys, coming into the year, I really did not expect them to I expect them to be near the bottom of the Mountain West with the Brent Brennan departure. And, they made a great hire, obviously bringing over Ken from the former Navy head coach. And I think that was a good hire for them. And he's kind of shown being able to pick up and keep a very competitive roster. Defensively, like we said, I don't think that they're world beaters on defense. I think if Oregon State can stop turning the ball over, be more efficient on offense, they can obviously, move the ball against San Jose State. We mentioned, Washington State scored 54 in their overtime win. But to get there, fellas, we talked defensively now. Let's talk offense. Let's talk the quarterbacks. Let's start with just each from what you guys are hearing. Ryan, let's start with you. What are you hearing as far as who might be the leader in the clubhouse now, or is it truly going to be a game time decision? Because as of Trent Bray Monday, it was a very open competition going into the weekend, and ambiguity might be good to keep San Jose State off balance.
I think it's still ambiguous as to who it is. Today was the day that we're supposed to find out who's going to be the starter, at least at the earliest. But I feel like if we haven't heard anything by now, maybe not even later on, but I feel like it's more of like hey, you'll find out when kickoff happens and the Beavers get their first offensive possession of the game. That's what I think it's really going to come down to. And it sounded like too, from the way that Bray kind of phrased things on Monday, was prepare for all three quarterbacks to be in there. They've all taken reps. So Jabari may see a series or maybe a couple plays in there that might have some packages for him, is kind of what Bray was alluding to. It spoke very highly to Ben and what he brings to the offense. Bray did. And so it was kind of telling when he said that, this bye week came at a good time to reevaluate the quarterback position, particularly the fact that they're not getting the production that they were getting out of that position. And that's something where it's like, hey, maybe you see Ben, maybe you see Giovanni.
Right.
Who knows? Who knows? But yeah, that's kind of just more of like, it's still open-ended right now.
Do you think we'll see anything kooky, like throw Kalen Guttridge out there to see what he can do, even in red shirt?
Hey, I mean, he had the first touchdown of the first scrimmage during fall camp.
I'm just curious.
I mean, the dude can sling it.
Right, and it's funny because I actually want to check in on this, fellas, because we posted a poll on the Beavers Edge board, just who should be Oregon State's starting quarterback on Saturday, and I mentioned that we were going to check in on it, and already got some decent responses, but it is overwhelmingly, guys, in favor of Ben Gulbranson, and we'll keep the percentages specifics for those Beavers Edge subscribers. But over 3/4 are thinking Ben Gulbranson, which I think is interesting. This is again a poll of some of the best Beaver fans around are Beavers Edge, man. I tell you this, but I if I were to guess, I think Ben's got a real chance to be the guy, because I think he knows how to, for really lack of better terms, not turn the ball over and game manage, because we've seen it, right? We've literally seen it before, albeit with a better running game, a better defense 2 years ago. Now, it might not work. That's the other thing. Because I see a lot of people go, well, 2 years ago. I get that. He had an elite running back stable, Damian Martinez, Jam Griffin, and Fenwick, and then had an elite defense, right? Like that Oregon State defense that year is some of the best we've seen. So I would lean Ben too. Curious what else you guys have to think in that regard.
And you're forgetting the better offensive line, NFL tight end, future NFL/SEC receivers, like legitimately everything.
Yeah, I mean, you took it a step further there, Tej.
that was a good group there that Ben had in 2022.
Stacked.
There were some words that Trent used on Monday. He literally said, "Manage the game," is what when he was talking about Ben. That's what he said.
That's telling.
So it depends what the coaching staff wants. Like, if they want a game manager, they will put Ben in.
Right.
Like, he's going to take high percentage throws. He's going to throw it within 10 yards. He's going to hand the ball off probably over 50% of the time. And they will hope that the defense can play well enough to force a turnover, give them good field position, and put Ben and the offense in a favorable position to win the game. So that's what they want. That's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
It's the way they made it sound like if they feel, I guess, confident enough in Giovanni's throwing ability, and they feel comfortable enough with him getting his legs back and running more and being more consistent and being able to call those plays with his legs, then I think they would go back to Giovanni, because we all know he offers more with his legs for this offense.
Right.
Whether it be running an option or just keeping it himself on a sneak, like the 71-yarder he ripped off against UNLV. Like, he does.
It's true.
He does offer that. So they feel confident in that. I would think that. But if you're going to ask me a prediction, I'll say Ben, because I think they're just going to want to avoid turnovers with the offense.
But also too, and don't mean to just cut you off there, Brendan.
No, totally.
But the thing is, and where I think a lot more Beaver fans are probably on that train of Ben, is when he got brought in against Cal, you saw the passing game come to life a little bit.
Calm down a little bit.
And that was something where, like, I think we just really haven't seen a lot of that from McCoy. Like, sure, yeah, he's thrown over, like I said in my column, like, he's thrown over 200 yards twice this entire season. But when you look at that in terms of context, like I was telling you during the UNLV, like that one DB for UNLV was having like a 20+ yard cushion.
Right.
Like any quarterback, regardless of skill level, could make that. So it's like there were things like that where I'm like, you just haven't seen the consistency there and being able to hit those shots down the field. And mentioning of the legs too, I'm like, we saw that early on, but they've gone away from it now for whatever reason that might be, whether that it's Gunderson going away from that or wanting his quarterback to be more of a pocket passer quarterback.
Right.
Like, or is it just like defensive fronts or anything like that they're getting and they're not just calling it as often? I mean, yeah, sure, they played against two good running defenses in UNLV and Cal, so like I kind of get that, but like McCoy is not a pocket passer by any means. And if you want your quarterback to do that, then Ben is probably your best option. If you want him to, be in the pocket, read what the defense is giving to him and make those high percentage throws, then you throw Ben in there. Otherwise, like if you're going to stick with McCoy, like get him out on the move, play action, get the ball quickly out of his hands, because otherwise, like I just it's a really tough decision evaluating that position. And in particular that, like, he was, the way that Bray was speaking about Ben and his skill set, like that's probably what they want going forward. They don't want those turnovers, those self-inflicted mistakes. So that's probably it. That's probably where I think they go Ben, and that's where I'm kind of hoping they do. But I wouldn't also be surprised either if McCoy trots out there on Saturday either. It's just preparing for any possible outcome of who they might bring out there at the quarterback position on Saturday.
Yeah, it's definitely, like you said, just great points by both you guys, because I think it is a conundrum. Because again, not to say that we're experts, but I remember, in all in good fun and good debate and everything else, the three of us kind of had to, take our lumps, so to speak, from a lot of people on the outside, because we all thought Ben was going to be named the guy coming out of fall camp. Right. And then it was kind of a surprise that it was Giovanni, because at the end of the day, we all just kind of thought he was kind of the quote safest option. And, I think now they're kind of circling back to that discussion because McCoy hasn't gone out and seized the job. But to put it further, I don't want to put it all on Giovanni McCoy. I don't think they have necessarily, like Ryan said, consistently put him in the positions to succeed with his skill set. And that's where, you know, I think Giovanni McCoy can win you games. I do. But like Ryan said, when it's like, hey, we're going to drop back and have, multiple step drops and turn him into a pocket passer, that's not his game. It needs to be more like Ryan said, you want those quick slants, those, rollouts, get him moving, get him out of the pocket, rolling to his right, rolling to his left. Maybe it's design runs and, maybe, and if their hesitation with that is, he gets hurt. Okay, well, if he gets dinged up, know that you've got a guy who can be a pocket passer and bend behind him. I know that's kind of a negative way to look at it, but football's a physical game. It just is the way it is. So, all that being said, yeah, I think that I could see a case, like you guys mentioned, for either guy. But, I know that they didn't say it when we talked about it this week. And, there was, a couple questions, asked this week of the guys and just kind of like, this team will never look at wanting to go to a bowl game and looking ahead and looking to like, hey, we need to win these next 2 weeks. They're focused solely on the week. But, deep down, we all know, like, if they don't win the next 2 weeks, they're probably not going to have a postseason to play for. And, that starts this week. And, ultimately, I'm just very curious in a bigger sense, the quarterback, all that, just how does Oregon State come out? Right? It's Dad's weekend. It's an early game. Correct me if I'm wrong here, fellas, and I just want to make sure. Other than the UNLV game, which was at an evening game, and then Colorado State, which was the evening, there's not been a day game since Oregon. And we look back and remember, Ryan, when you and I were walking on the field pregame, and I'm like, the vibe wasn't quite there. And, Oregon State kind of had a bit of a sleepy performance. So I'm curious to see how Oregon State performs after a bye week. We saw last time we're like, how does Trent Bray handle a bye week? They played Colorado State. That turned out to be an interesting game. So it's lucky both their bye weeks, I think come at home. And we've talked about on this podcast time and time again, how Oregon State, simply put, they're going to play better at home. Right? We saw it against UNLV, saw it against, again, Oregon. That would have been much different, I think, if that game was in Eugene. Oregon State just plays better at home, period. So that all being said, yes, I do expect wholesale improvement from a pretty nasty blowout in Berkeley a couple weeks ago. But now that the dust has settled, there are still some things I'm curious to see, and kind of just a last kind of preview of this game. I know that San Jose State is going to throw the ball more than they run, but like Ryan said, there have been some signs of a run defense the last couple weeks against UNLV and Cal. It was all-time low against Nevada. Really, really bad. And, then it got better against UNLV. And then, again, the counter argument is, well, Brendan, Cal didn't need to run the ball with how Fernando Mendoza was throwing. Fair point. I hear you wholeheartedly. But for the most part, the few times they gave the ball to Jade Knott, he was wrapped up. Now, maybe that was, a case of Ott being fresh or not so fresh after an injury coming back. But again, you have to look at things you can still hang your hat on. And, last but not least, guys, I have no reason to think this is going to happen. But can Trent Bray keep the team engaged and focused amidst now what is a 3-game losing streak? So what's kind of your thoughts there? Is how do you kind of see it starting this weekend, Ryan?
That's a very good question, particularly with like how they've approached this bye week compared to the first bye week. It's a lot more less live periods, more focused on keeping guys healthy, more focused on that
Interesting.
realm.
Interesting.
So they've switched that around, and so that's something where I'm kind of interested to see how that approach plays a factor into that. But really, like, I think you just gotta, regardless of what the crowd is like and what that atmosphere is, you just got to start fast. Just got to start fast and be like, hey, look, like, we need to come out there, right the ship, play a complete game on both sides of the ball through 4 quarters. And you just make it, you make it that point of emphasis to come out there and play a game like that, which we haven't seen them quite put it all together yet this season. So if they can do that, I think they got a good shot of setting themselves up for for a win on Saturday and then being able to take that performance into next week on the road.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if you don't, like, that, this is the game. This is it. This is the game. This is it. If you don't, for the season, making to a bowl game, like, this is the one game you've got to have. And I really just need to see the team come out with that type of energy.
Right. And I think that's well put. And, to TJ's point earlier in the podcast, one thing that this is one of the first times all year, and maybe it's the fact that Oregon State's at the point in their schedule where they're just drawing less outside interest. But one of the more fascinating things, folks, I love to watch the spreads in these games. This is the first time all year a Beavers spread has not moved what it was opened. Beavers opened as a 3-point favorite. It's remained a 3-point favorite all week long. And, that, like TJ said, bit of a pick 'em. If this game's in San Jose, it's probably -1 San Jose State, maybe just straight pick 'em. Now, that all being said, I'm like, to Ryan's point, if you can't come out and get fired up for this game, knowing, because again, I know there's one thing that they tell us and, verbally, but deep down, the players have to know, like Ryan said, if you don't win this one, like, players aren't, they will give us the coach speak, but they know. And, like I said to you guys before, this is where, a guy like Jaden Robinson, I am looking for a guy like him to go out and just have a standout performance and be like, not without the postseason is not how I want to end my college career, right? There are guys on this roster who have been through some tough stuff, and I'll throw Josh Gray in there too, who have been through so much that kind of deserve to have at least something positive to kind of hang their hat on in these last couple weeks. And I think you're going to see, I do think you're going to see a sense of urgency. To counter that, if you don't, TJ, you're going to be in some trouble for the rest of the games this season if you don't see any kind of counterpunch. Because San Jose State's going to come out swinging. If Oregon State doesn't have a counterpunch, yeah, it could be a long last couple weeks of the season, but I'm still optimistic. And
it's not good for the fans either. You need to keep people interested. Like we spent all season talking about needing to essentially cling to relevancy, and going out with a whimper in this first year of being essentially an independent is not good. It's not good for viewership. You need those viewership numbers to be as high and as intriguing as possible. And losing a game at home to San Jose State, and then that would sort of lead you to say, okay, like losing by a couple of scores to Washington State and Boise State, like there'd just be less people interested, and that's really not a good thing for a roster that it has taken its lumps with injuries and transfers, but is built to be competitive. Is the word to use? Do you know what I want to see in this game, guys? They haven't run the football in 3 weeks.
Yeah, ain't that the truth?
This is what the offense is built on.
Yeah,
we got to run the dang ball. 2.2 yards to carry against Cal. Not a good running performance against UNLV. Like, the one thing you know about your offense is that you have good running backs and you have a good offensive line. Run the ball.
So
that should be the number one priority before the defense, before the passing game, before the quarterback, before any of that. You can't even do what you're best at. If you can't do what you're best at, then the season's probably cooked. Right?
Well,
it's that way for any team.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's a tremendous point, TJ. And here's my quick thought on that. Ryan, you brought it up. Like, a couple weeks ago, you and I mentioned during the Nevada game, we said, wow, first game without Jam, right? Like, Hankerson's able to handle the workload. Then in the 2 games since, and again, I'll give UNLV and Cal some credit. They are better teams than Nevada, period. But, like, to TJ's point, the running game has not been itself, and I think not having Jam is a part of that, and I just don't think Saladin Hala has been given enough of a runway to really show what he can do behind Hankerson. I think Hank the Tank is, he's tough as nails. He's going to go out there and give you everything he's got. But I do think there's probably some wear and tear and fatigue setting in over the course of a game when you're taking that many carries and maybe you were used to half that workload with Jam, right?
Yeah.
So that
and the explosiveness too.
Right, you have to figure that out. So TJ's absolutely right. I think that can open up a lot more things. Maybe we need to see Zach Card more in the jet sweep game, right? I mean, there need to be things to make this offense more explosive.
Yeah,
So Ryan.
get some of those guys that have speed more involved in there. You mentioned Zach Card. I wanted to see more Taz Reddick's more involved in the offense as well. David Wells, Jordan Anderson, something to create some form of separation to make it a little bit easier on the quarterbacks, or just something to generate those explosive plays down the field. Because that's kind of been a point of emphasis all year is, hey, we need to get those explosive plays. Okay, but I'm not gonna knock on Jeremiah Noga, Trent Walker, or Darius Clemens. Those guys just don't have that top level speed that an Anthony Gould or a Silas Bolden did. The closest that you're going to get to it is Zach Card by far. But like being able to at least generate some of that and keeping defenses relatively honest, in addition to running the ball, which is your bread and butter. It's what you're good at. But like just being able to get those guys involved a little bit more is something that I want to see in this offense, and I've been kind of clamoring for it for a while now. I'm like, it makes no sense to me logistically, Brendan, for Darius Clemens and Trent Walker to be taking those jet sweeps. Nothing against those two and what they bring to this offense. It's just that's not who they are as players. It's just not like. That's just not who they are. Like, and I know Coach Hinson spoke highly of what Taz brings, and that's partly too where I'm a little excited to see. Hopefully, they might get him a little more involved this weekend, because he still has that speed, not like a Zach Card, but he's fast enough. He can generate some separation, and he plays bigger than his frame. And so that's something where I'm like, if you can get him involved, if you can get Card maybe more involved a little bit too, and David Wells, we haven't hardly heard much from in terms of production since Idaho State.
Yeah.
And that was something where that speed made a big difference on that touchdown pass. Because otherwise, if that's any other receiver, I think that's probably picked off by the Idaho State secondary,
or an overthrow, no, for sure, and I think it's going to be very interesting because also just who really wants this game more, right, fellas? And I think that's also we'll close with this. Also, why the odds makers have it as it is, right? Oregon State coming off 44-7 loss to Cal. For San Jose State coming off a 33-10 loss to Fresno State. Fresno State, while okay, is not elite Fresno State this year. So, they're kind of doing some soul searching during their bye week as well. And, I will give Oregon State the nod as the odds makers do, just being at home. But I think it's going to be close. And obviously make sure to check back in for the Beavers Edge predictions later coming up this week on Friday. But just real quick, kind of one thing from each of you guys that you're most looking forward to seeing in this matchup. We'll start with you, Ryan.
It's hard to pinpoint just one down, but I think the biggest thing for me is quarterback as to who this is, because otherwise, like, I think that dictates almost everything of how the offensive side is going to perform this weekend. And whether it's McCoy, whether it's Gold-Branson, whether it's Johnson, I think that'll tell you a lot, at least what you'll see offensively there. So that's kind of what I'm looking for this weekend, as to who's going to be that guy to step up.
TJ, real quick, what do you got?
Run the ball, baby. Run.
There it is. I want to see Jaden Robinson play some good defense on Nick Nash. That's what I'm looking forward to see. Is shut down their best player. Very Belichickian. Ryan will appreciate it, but just take their best player out of the game plan. Figure out how to do it. But nevertheless, stay tuned to BeaversEdge.com. All three of us will be at Reser Stadium on Saturday. Ryan and I will obviously, and TJ will be bringing guys updates. We'll have a post game, all of it over at BeaversEdge.com. Thanks, fellas, for joining me on this edition of the podcast. Always fun to catch up, and make sure to stay tuned for our injury report, staff predictions, and much more coming up at BeaversEdge.com. Thanks again for watching this edition of the Edge Podcast.